Hello, I'm Craig Constantine.
Hello, Craig. How are you?
I'm good. Thank
I'm
you. You were going to say?
I'm Peju or
Nice,
Paige.
Paige. Nice to meet you. I think we've been on a couple of Hollywood Squares calls. I always make the joke about if people are old enough to know about the old TV show Hollywood Squares, where they put people in a 3 by 3 tic tac toe grid. Zoom calls remind me of that. So we've done a
Yeah.
couple calls like that. I know
hmm
that you took the podcasting workshop. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So anyway, welcome. I wanted to say, can you talk me through? We started talking about your vision board project, and there's like a whole bunch to unpack because you had to go through the whole journey of you used to do it in person, and then we had a global pandemic, and you had to transition to teaching it virtually, and now congratulations, you're going back to teaching it for real in January. So first, give me like talk me through what that is, like what is the project, what are you trying to give to people when they attend?
Sure. So with the vision board workshop, I call it Discover Your Life Map. And the reason why I call it that is because everyone's always looking for some sort of map that they're supposed to navigate their lives with, right?
Hmm.
But we just never find the map. So the way I create the vision boards or what I really offer to people is for them to really dig out their desires and the things that they're supposed to be really focusing on in whatever current season of their lives and maybe projects they could be focusing on, but most importantly the areas of their lives that they should be focused on. So we do deep meditations in the workshop, and there are all these things from when you're young that maybe you really wanted to do or you shared with people and they're like, "Oh, that's such a stupid idea. Don't do that." And now you're older, even if you see a snippet on TV or an ad of whatever that thing is, there's always that feeling that could like bubble up and something's probably like, oh, it's too late, or oh, I wish I did this. So those are the type of things that actually come up on the board. So it's not a workshop where you come with all your photos and you say, these are all the things I want to do, in the next year. Because if you want a new car, a Ferrari, or maybe a new house, how do you know that's not going to add more stress to your life at this point? They're
Right.
great. Or is it going to bring more ease and joy to you, really? So, how do you know those things? So, it's a very interesting, deep workshop, but it's fun, 100% fun. You do not use, the analytical part of your brain, just the creative side throughout. And that's really what I offer to people.
When we started talking, I was like, remind me which, and like, okay, so we talked about like which pod, we call them cohorts, which cohort you went through. And I was immediately curious about, I've talked to a lot of people, not necessarily on this show, but I've talked to a lot of people who during the pandemic decided to create something, like create something new online. But you have not necessarily rare, but a less common experience of having had something and then having to convert it, or either let it go away or convert it to being online. And it struck me as really interesting that your, I'm going to say your instinct was to take a course on podcasting. You're like I need to do this really huge complicated thing, but instead I'm going to go take a course on podcasting. And I'm wondering what about, like, what drew you in to like take the leap, as they would say, take the leap to learn to podcast. And then how did that affect what you ended up creating as your online version of your project or your course?
Sure. So they really had nothing to do with each other at first.
Mm,
But the what really led me to take the podcast fellowship actually was I had bought the URL. So the podcast is called the Badass Fabulous Podcast, as you might know.
hmm.
And I bought the URL badassfabulous.com back in like 2010 or so, but I never used it. And I always kind of knew that it would be about what I really wanted it to be about was just learning about people's personal routines. People who seem to be successful in the world or in small communities, and to just really learn about what makes them tick. Like, is it, what do they do? Is it meditations? What makes them who they really are? And I felt it will be on video. That was the whole thought. And then in
Hmm.
2019, I was just learning more and more about podcasting. And I'm like, okay, this sounds like it's better. I even took voice lessons because I wanted to deliver a really good podcast. I don't know if that's embarrassing, but I did voice coaching lessons for a
It's
couple of
really
months.
hard. I don't. It's not
Yeah.
embarrassing. It's
Okay.
really. It's, this shit's really hard.
It's so hard, it was and it was really good. I'm glad I did it as well. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit, the by that time, even the thought of doing the podcast had kind of slipped away because I just got so busy. Then I was doing my master's and working on this 200-page dissertation, so
Oof,
I didn't even
right.
have time for that. But once I completed it, I got the akimbo workshops, and I thought, okay, podcasting, how do I create a podcast? Before I saw the email, actually, just thinking about it, I tried to build it on my own. It's a million and 99 things out there,
Yes.
about podcasting. And I'd been trying to do this thing for about 3, 4 months or even 5 months. And then when the Akimbo podcast fellowship came out, the course, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to have a more structured approach to this, learn
Mm,
from people who already did it, be part of a community of other people actually doing podcasting. I had no one in my circle that ever podcasted. If
mm.
is podcasted, is that a word?
It is now.
Yeah, I create my own words. That's
Yeah.
something I'm known for. Um, yeah, so I joined that, and it was really truly amazing to do it. And now with the vision board workshop, it was really interesting because I had stopped teaching it, like you had mentioned before. It was only in person, and I only taught it when people who knew I did the
Yeah.
workshops
When
were
the
like,
the
are
need
you
arise, and here's
right?
6, 7, 10. Okay, we'll run one. Right.
Right, then I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do it. Bring two of your friends along or something. um, and then I didn't really bridge it together, but I feel the podcast, what I talk about in the podcast, came from that life map that I've been doing for over 10 years, because
Mm,
the podcast is really about, having the courage to become who you're created to be. So that's what badass really stands for, is, having that courage. And then fabulous is, after facing your fears and overcoming certain struggles, you become more comfortable in your being and in yourself, right? And that is what makes you really truly fabulous, when you're more
mm,
fabulous in your own skin. So, and discover your life map, it's the vision board. But after the vision board, I sit one on one with people, and we go through every single piece of thing on their vision board, and we distribute it into 10 different areas of their life, basically. And from that, we create goals. So it's an action map that's created. So when that
mm,
action map is created, then they get a clearer sense of, okay, these are the main areas I should be focusing on in my life, because you will get more actions and goals in certain areas than some others. And it's usually only 1 to 3 areas for everybody,
mm,
which is really interesting. So when you're being badass fabulous, you get clear on what you should be going after. And it's a journey. You're not just badass and fabulous. It's like this constant journey of life where you're always conquering something, overcoming something, learning something, going through something, but you also need to have fun and joy in doing it. And I believe that's how they kind of merge together. I don't know if
mm.
that answers the question, but if I went way
They're
off.
open-ended questions.
Okay.
I like that you mentioned, first of all, fabulous is a fabulous word, and I'm torn between, like, let's talk more about what we mean when we say fabulous, but I'm I love that you talked about, so your vision board project is about, like, clarifying one's own vision. And then I don't want to say the really hard part, but another really hard part is how to turn that into action. So yeah, okay, I have this vision. I have a vision, right? Okay. Now what's now, and I think it's neat to see that you're talking about showing people through your project and through the podcast, showing people how to, like, here's how to do the thing to get you to badass fabulous. But also, you had to do that yourself. Like, you have to bootstrap that the first time. You have to do it in order to be able to just deliver it to other people. But then to teach them how to do it is like a whole nother thing. So I'm just super interested in whenever I find, um, I don't want to say things, but like when I find situations where somebody is all excited about showing people something, and I'm like, you do realize that you had to do that first yourself, and that's really hard. Like, so do you realize, is there a point where you realized, or maybe that's what made you make the course, like, if you had badassfabulous.com, that's an aspirational, like, oh, I'm buying that. Like, you pinned that to the wall, figuratively speaking. You have that piece of real estate, and it like rattles in the back of your head, and it draws you. But that's like, a lot of people do that. A lot of people have a really good idea. Like, okay, how did you get from the thought that you pinned down as a domain name, like, oh, now my thing, now it has a name. Like, how did you get from that to figuring out, all right, I'm gonna press record, or it's gonna be a podcast, or I'm gonna take this course. Like, how did you go from that ephemeral vision, that non-solid, I mean, it's a clear vision, but you can't touch it. It's like a thing that you can see, but you can't quite reach it. So how'd you get from there to like, this is what I'm doing next?
Great question.
Rambly.
No, that's a great question. I love it. And this would sound so, I don't know if it'll sound cheesy, but I got the name through a vision board that I did.
Mm-hmm.
It was at a time where I think I had just left corporate. I do have a background in banking technology for many years, and I had left that to start a business. But because I had worked in banking for so long, after leaving, I didn't even have a sense of self or what I enjoyed doing. So the first thought that came to me was, I think it was even my sister. She's like, "Why not do one of your vision boards and see what shows up for you?" I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think of that."
Mm.
So I did the vision board, and this was back in maybe 2010 or 9. I don't remember. It was a very long time ago, and I worked on the vision board, and the names were there very clearly, and I remember it was my sister's boyfriend at the time. They had come over for dinner, and I asked them, I'm like, what do you guys think of the name Badass Fabulous? And he's like, ooh, I would save that domain right now. It's a very catchy name. You could even start a t-shirt
He's over
business
there like,
with it.
that's dumb. I'm stealing your domain name.
Yeah. So, after thinking about it, the name, I went to bed. I will never forget that night. I went to bed and woke up the next morning, and all that was in my head was Badass Fabulous.
Mm,
It was that, and the other name that showed up was Genius Glam, funny enough.
mm.
Um, but Badass Fabulous kept ringing at the back of my head. And when that happened, I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to buy this domain name and
Leap. Yeah.
just
Yeah, the
do it.
whole
I don't know what it will
$15,
be.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no clue what it will be. Maybe it will be a t-shirt line, who knows.
Mm,
So but even on that vision board, I could see certain things. I couldn't really piece it together then. I could see certain things of working with people, or some sort of transition in life,
mm,
about life, but I didn't really know what that was. And back then, I was only doing the vision boards. I hadn't even discovered the part about turning the vision board into an action map.
right.
So it's really interesting because this kind of shows the whole journey. So it was only the vision board, but I noticed the vision board, it's not just me putting my desires on the board. So these things would come up basically, and I thought, okay, what do I do with it next? So I personally started just taking all the different images I saw and actually writing out what I felt they were, or what
Mm,
I felt they signified, like how they relate to certain things in my life at this point. Um, and I'll look at them constantly over and over. And it's really interesting. I started creating, oh, I think creating a map basically, of, oh, I think I'm meant to work on this part of me, or I think I'm supposed to reach out to this person to create something. And and every time I would do that based on what I felt from the board,
Mm.
just amazing things will happen. And there were very little actions, funny enough,
I
but it
think
was
that's a
just,
brilliant way to break the analysis paralysis that, well, I don't suffer from it all the time, but sometimes I get too many possibilities, too many choices, and like writing it all out and then like picking one, and then check back. Like, well, that didn't work out well. Okay, cool. Write down it didn't work out well. Try the next one. Like, because then at least you can't steer if you're not moving. Like,
right.
so at least let's
That's
get
right.
let's get moving here so I can figure out where I'm going. Um,
Yeah.
did you you mentioned like way back, like 10 minutes ago, you mentioned that in the podcast, you're talking to people to find out who they are. And I love that phrase because I have a whole other show where I talk about talking to people to find out who they are, what they do, and why they do it. And it's such a simple thing to say. I want to know who you are.
Mm.
But there's so much that you would have to tell me for me to feel that I now had some inkling of who you are. What I'm wondering is, have you found any common threads? So the people that you're talking to who are badass, fabulous, and you're trying to figure out who those people are. Are there common threads that you're finding already?
Yes, and it's a term that I call beautiful mess. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily just beauty, but it's more like when people see someone who might be badass fabulous on the badass fabulous journey, I would say, is their life seems so put together and so perfect, on the outside. But behind closed doors, they could either be suffering from, it could be self doubt. That's something I used to suffer a lot from, fear of even taking steps towards dreams, even if it's a baby step, those are things I had to overcome over the years. Um, they're very messy. So I also work with the one-on-one clients. I don't know if you know that as well, on well-being.
Mm.
I do energy healing, transformation, and management as well, which helps with the journey to becoming, because you need to know who you are, and by knowing who you are, you need to know yourself, your body, your energy, how you function. So in working with people and also other fellow badass fabulouses, their lives are very messy, where it's a lot of it could even be, maybe they have too many ideas they're going towards, like always very scattered, and they're always on the right path, but then they get distracted, and it's like, so there's this thing where they keep doing the same thing, but they're not getting anywhere, even though it might seem as though things are moving, but they're really
Mm.
not moving as they're not really making progress, even though it might seem as though in you know reality, or to the public eye, I should say. Um, what else? And the other most important thing is they're always fighting. There's always some sort of fight, and it's so interesting because I go through the same battles. I see myself in these people as well,
Mm.
and there's always a battle of always trying to improve, always trying to be better, always working on themselves. And there is something they're trying to hit in life. It's like something they're trying to accomplish, and they
Mm.
might not know what that is, but they would see a lot of things and know, nope, that's not it. But there's something much deeper that they're trying to figure out about life, and that's what they keep going after. So that's those are some things, some common threads I've
Thank you
noticed.
for sharing those. There's a lot of wisdom packed in there. There's
Really.
there's also I'm also distracted by, yeah, there's also a lot of self prescription there, Craig, that you could work on. But let's not turn this into the Craig therapy show.
We
Do
could.
we could, except we only have 32 seconds left.
Ooh,
Whew,
okay.
saved.
All right. Saved by by the bell.
Saved by the bell. Um, let's
Yeah.
see. There was one other thing, but we're not going to have time.
Um,
I think I'm just going to say, I think I'm just going to say that was a pleasure and freaking fabulous. And thank you for taking the time to drop in and talk with me today. It doesn't have to be our only chat. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for having me. This has been so amazing just to chat and to share things about me. So